Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Doreen Harris, the acting president and CEO of NYSERDA. It's a real pleasure to see all of you again virtually, and I hope everyone in your families has remained well in the time since the council last met. It is my pleasure to kick off today's meeting of the New York State Climate Action Council. And for those who don't know me, again, I was named acting president and CEO of NYSERDA about 2 months ago. And among my duties are to co-chair the Climate Action Council with my colleague, Basil Sagos, Commissioner of DEC, who is joining me today to advance what is the third meeting of the New York State Climate Action Council. So I am honored not only to assume this role, but also to join this group in executing on our charge to craft a plan that delivers on our nation-leading goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. So it is a real pleasure to chair this meeting with the Commissioner and also to advance very significant developments in the world of our Council and its implementation. So we have chosen to hold today's meeting via a webinar as a matter of safety, of course, but also to enable broader participation for New Yorkers statewide. And I'm pleased to see how many have joined the Council today in this forum. So that we may have another smooth and productive meeting, I would like to remind the Council members of our logistics and procedures for today's meeting. The first is to please remain on mute if you are not speaking so as to minimize background noise. A member of NYSERDA's IT team will also monitor members to ensure that they are muted. We encourage all council members to join via video if at all possible to allow us all to engage as fully as we can through this virtual forum. You can turn your video on by clicking the camera button at the bottom of your screen. If it is gray, it is on. If it is red, it is not on. And if you have questions or thoughts to share, we would ask that you raise your hand via the webinar functionality using the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. This will indicate to Commissioner Sagos or myself that you would like to speak. And if you need help with any aspect of the IT system, please do reach out to our IT department, including Karen Fusco of NYSERDA, who can be reached at karen.fusco@nyserda.ny.gov. If you need any help at all, we'd be glad to assist. We will be advancing a number of roll call votes during today's meeting, and we hope to work through the logistics of that process smoothly. So we will be calling on members to provide their vote in alphabetical order and ask you to place your vote saying aye or no. So please be prepared to mute and unmute as these votes advance. And so to test our skills here, I'd like to start by calling the roll to see which members of the council are in attendance today. And I will ask NYSERDA's Valerie Milankovich to do so in an alphabetical order. Valerie?
Thank you, Doreen. Good afternoon, council members and designees. When I call you, please acknowledge your participation in today's Climate Action Council meeting. I acknowledge the presence of co-chair Doreen Harris, co-chair Sagos.
Present.
Commissioner Ball.
Present. Thank you.
You're welcome. Donna DeCarolis.
Here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Commissioner Dominguez.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Gavin Donahue.
Present.
Excellent. Dennis Elsenbeck.
Here.
Great. Thank you. CEO Falcone. Excellent. On behalf of Eric Gertler, Kevin Hansen.
Here.
Great. Rose Harvey.
Here.
Bob Howard.
Present.
Peter Wanowitz.
I am present.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. President, soon to be Chancellor Malatros.
Here.
CEO Quinones?
Present.
Great. Commissioner Reardon?
I'm here, sorry.
No, that's okay. Great. Thank you. Ann Reynolds? Great. I can see you. Now I can hear you. Chair Rhodes?
Here.
Super. On behalf of Secretary of State Rosado, Keisha Santiago?
Good afternoon, everyone. Present.
Good afternoon. Raya Salter?
Present.
Great. Paul Shepson?
Present.
On behalf of Commissioner Wisniewski, Rebecca Kepnick?
I'm here.
Great. And on behalf of Commissioner Zucker, Gary Ginsburg?
I'm not sure Gary's on. This is
Okay.
Henry Splitoff for Dr.
Hi,
Zucker.
Henry.
Hi.
I will substitute you in for the remaining roll calls. Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I acknowledge that all of the council members are in attendance, and there is a presence for today's Climate Action Council meeting.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you all for your attendance and attention today. We do have, if you could turn to the next slide, please. We do have a full agenda for today, starting with consideration of the minutes of our meeting, which was held on June 24th. Thereafter, Commissioner Segos and I will share a few reflections as council co-chairs. And then we will proceed to discussion and consideration of the council's advisory panels and working groups. And in response to comments from a few of you, we will also discuss how to consider waste emissions in developing the scoping plan as a council. And following these discussions and the discussion on waste emissions, we also will hear updates on CLCPA implementation, including actions the state has taken through its agencies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And we will wrap up with next steps. So a full agenda for today, and my thanks for your participation again. Next slide, please. Let's proceed with consideration of the minutes of the last meeting held on June 24th. The council members received the draft minutes with their meeting materials. Are there any discussion items on the minutes themselves? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So with that, we can move to approve the minutes. Again, I will ask Valerie to call the names of each of the council members. When you hear your name called, please signify that you either approve of the minutes by saying aye, or you disapprove of the minutes by saying no. Valerie?
Thank you, Doreen. Doreen Harris?
Aye.
Co-Chair Segos?
Aye.
Commissioner Ball?
Aye.
Donna D. Carolis?
Aye.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Aye.
Gavin Donahue?
Aye.
Dennis Elsenbeck?
Aye.
Thomas Falcone?
Aye.
Kevin Hansen?
Aye.
Rose Harvey?
Aye.
Bob Howarth?
Aye.
Peter Iwanowitz?
Aye.
President Malatras?
Aye.
CEO Quinones?
Aye.
Commissioner Reardon?
Aye.
Ann Reynolds?
Aye.
Chair Rhodes?
Aye.
Keisha Santiago?
Aye.
Raya Salter?
Aye.
Paul Shepson?
Aye.
Rebecca Kepnick?
Aye.
Henry Splitoff?
Aye.
With that, the minutes are approved.
Thank you. The minutes are adopted and will soon be posted to the Climate Action Council's website. So thank you all. Turning to the next slide, please. Co-Chair Segos and I wanted to start the meeting with some remarks and reflections as to our events and progress made over the last 2 months, particularly since the last meeting of the council. If you could turn to the next slide, please. So front of mind, of course, remains our response to the COVID pandemic. And while our COVID response is showing gains by all accounts across New York State, and we are encouraged by the numbers that we receive daily from Governor Cuomo and his team, it is true that our physical infrastructure is demonstrating its vulnerabilities and the clear need for more attention from our utilities and other essential service providers for investments in more resilient and adaptive infrastructure, which is indeed a focus of the CLCPA. We all know clearly the news from our state in the recent weeks is not good with regard to the impacts that Tropical Storm Isaias had on our state as a whole, with approximately 1.3 million New Yorkers experiencing power outages during the course of the event. In fact, peak power outages in New York State impacted approximately 920,000 customers at one given time. And so, as the governor himself said, the worst of this situation was avoidable, and it cannot happen again. And while the governor and the state agencies are taking swift action and corrective action, this event for us as a council should serve as a reminder that we must integrate measures of resilience and adaptation with regard to our systems and our approaches to changing the impacts of the climate conditions that we see across our state. So this is a call for resilience as we see it, and an unfortunate one nevertheless. Next slide, please. I will also note in positive news for sure with regard to program implementation toward the achievement of the CLCPA. July was certainly a big month for clean energy, and in fact, we had 3 major milestones as a state in executing on the goals of the CLCPA from the perspective of renewables, the built environment, and transportation, which we wanted to share with you today. This is an important aspect of our work as we look to build back from the COVID crisis, from the perspective of economics, as well as expanding job opportunities for New Yorkers as well. So in July, from the renewables perspective, we had the great news of the issuance of the largest solicitations for renewables ever in the United States. And this is, again, indicative of our commitment to use clean energy as a tool for those rebuilding efforts. Governor Cuomo announced this issuance in total for up to 4,000 megawatts of renewable capacity. That is an incredibly impressive number, even for those who have been working in this field for many years, enough to power over 1.5 million homes annually. And specifically, these solicitations have 3 components. First, an offshore wind solicitation for up to 2,500 megawatts of capacity, coupled with a $400 million investment in New York's port infrastructure to create the market push and pull together to bring this industry here to New York. In addition, NYSERDA and the New York Power Authority each issued solicitations for land-based renewables of over 1,500 megawatts of capacity. And lastly, we issued a request for information to identify sites for future build-ready sites that the state would advance in fulfillment of this year's Clean Energy Resources Development and Incentive Program. So all told, these solicitations are expected to spur $7 billion in direct investments and 4,500 short and long-term jobs. Again, much needed investments for our state and investments that are committed to be advanced with the payment of prevailing wages as well, and an important note, which we believe will help to jumpstart our economy and move the industry forward for New York. The prioritization of these solicitations for New York are important factors for us to consider as we advance our work as a council, we would believe. In addition, from the perspective of the built environment, NYSERDA and the state's investor-owned utilities announced a new statewide framework that will provide for improved and coordinated delivery of nearly $1 billion through 2025 in advancing energy efficiency services for LMI customers statewide. You can see the breakout of the funding here on the slide, but I will note that consistent with the accelerated efficiency order from the Public Service Commission, a minimum of 40% of the collective incremental LMI funding will be committed to serving affordable multifamily buildings through these investments. And that is an important aspect of this, as both the utilities and the total LMI portfolio budget are directed toward this affordable multifamily market segment. These investments will help us to reach more than 350,000 low to moderate income New Yorkers throughout the state over the next 5 years, which is more than double the number of households that are currently served through energy efficiency services. And coupled with the Public Service Commission's $250 million annual direct payment assistance program, these investments will also help New Yorkers control their energy costs and access to the benefits of clean energy solutions. So this action also furthers the CLCPA's goals to improve access to clean energy solutions and energy affordability to LMI households and communities. So a second major development in July for New York. I will now turn the meeting to my co-chair, Basil Sagos, for additional comments on our recent developments. With the next slide, please. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Doreen. And you've had a good run so far as acting president and CEO, as the slides will attest. You see some of the work that NYSERDA and other agencies, DEC, have done over the last few months. And you begin to look forward, you get a real sense of how climate action is, in fact, in many ways, a massive job opportunity for New York State and a huge part of our economic recovery. So Governor said that he's drilled that down on all of us, that we not only need to reduce our emissions, but we need to look at these amazing opportunities to seize economic growth in the next decade and beyond. So this is really exciting. I'll just cover a couple of things quickly on also summer announcements. We signed in New York State a memorandum of understanding with 14 other states and the District of Columbia on 100% new and medium heavy duty vehicle sales with a goal of 100% by 2050, 30% by 2030. That complements what we're doing on the Clean Transportation New York, which is the Volkswagen settlement funds that many of the agencies here are a part of. The governor also announced the so-called Make Ready program, and it's Make Ready, make New York State ready for the availability, the widespread availability of electric vehicles. The Make Ready program will enable 50,000 EV charging stations by 2025, $1.5 billion in new investment. And of the $700 million total announcement, $206 million is to benefit LMI and disadvantaged communities. So it's a very significant recognition that we need to make sure that this program benefits all New Yorkers. Next slide, please. We've also been busy on the climate justice front. As many of you know, took part in the climate justice working group meeting, the first meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago. The big task of the climate justice working group is to identify disadvantaged communities, and that will then guide much of the work that we as a body then talk about when we talk about where we're making our investments and how we ultimately calculate the benefits of those investments. The climate justice working group is to be seen as a significant resource for us as a body. We are to consult with them They will be meeting on a regular basis. Rosa Mendez, who's listening but not participating in this call here, is chairing that on my behalf. We have a great and deep group of individuals and professionals who are helping to dig into the roots of that obligation, and ultimately will be a great resource for us. One of the most important things that we need to finish this summer, and really today, ideally, is to create the advisory panels and panel the advisory panels and get them working as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Some of this will be review for everyone on board here. There's 6 advisory panels: transport, ag, forestry, land use, local government, power gen, energy efficiency, and then energy intensive trade exposed industries. Each of those panels is chaired by a commissioner, state commissioner, or the commissioner's designee. And the advisory panel is to look within its sector to identify emissions opportunities for us. There's also the Just Transition Working Group that's chaired by Roberta Reardon, Commissioner of Labor, and Doreen NYSERDA, and also includes HCR and PSC. They are to undertake a jobs report, workforce training needs, and power plant site reuse opportunities. Again, as I think you will see, a very impressive group. I mentioned the Climate Justice Working Group, first meeting a couple weeks ago. We will have another meeting on that soon. So please go to climate.ny.gov on a regular basis to check in on the timing of these meetings. Next slide, please. So the advisory panel work product. Each of the advisory panels is to use its professional skills to identify the emissions that we can achieve as a state, obviously consistent with what we are doing as a council, and really specific to the sector in which they are experts. The advisory panels have to create a list of recommendations that come then to us for emissions reducing policies, and that then becomes part of our CAC's scoping plan. It's listed on the screen there, what they're supposed to look into, but obviously looking into the scale of impact, looking into the costs that are knowable to achieve those reductions, and then describing co-benefits, and very importantly, environmental justice outcomes, which is a centerpiece of this entire effort. The recommendations themselves have to be sector-based, and what does that mean? Each of these panels is, in fact, a sector or a series of sectors. So we want the sector experts to develop sector recommendations. Now, it's not enough to say economy-wide. We have to, do X, Y, and Z. The sector itself has to determine how it can reduce emissions. And there will be certainly opportunities for 8 advisory panels to work together, because quite often there are overlapping interests, overlapping functions that panels will need to coordinate on. So we will encourage that. And very importantly, the panels, we're encouraging the panels to include climate adaptation and resilience considerations. That's in a way the other side of the coin, but in effect, for us to remain competitive as a state and to remain safe as a state, we need expertise and recommendations that involve protecting our built environment and our landscapes, and ultimately our populations. Next, please. So consultation. We would expect the panels to meet at least once a month. And in addition to meeting once a month, we would expect that there's going to be a significant amount of work outside the formal meetings process to both prepare for these meetings, prepare for the briefings that we expect from the panels, we the CAC expect from the panels, but also to do other work as incidental to the reports and recommendations that they're coming up with. We as a CAC would expect regular progress reports, whether it's oral or written, during our meetings. And then ultimately we want to make sure that the panels stay on schedule to give us recommendations in time enough for the scoping plan to become live. Panels are, like, as we are we as a CAC going to consult with the Climate Justice Working Group, the panels themselves that will coordinate with the Climate Justice as well as the Just Transition Working Groups that will no doubt help their efforts and coordinate their efforts as they cross-fertilize the best ideas. Public input is crucial to this process. We encourage all of the panelists to seek expertise in the subject areas. We have what I believe is a very rich group of individuals in terms of expertise, but nonetheless, you may hit a wall, and we would encourage you to go out and seek expertise, whether it's from us or from outside bodies. We would expect at least one public forum in order from each panel to receive public input. And we would expect the panels to provide full transparency by making meetings open to the public and also publishing minutes of those meetings. Again, go back to our climate.ny.gov website to find more. In terms of support, next slide, please. Knowing that the work of the panels is going to be intense, we have envisioned a robust support network for them. First, as we are using the E3 institution, Energy and Environmental Economics, we would encourage the panels to make use of that expertise and those individuals that are part of that organization. We would also envision a support network of staff from the various state agencies. So you're not going to be off necessarily on your own without the benefit of some connection to state agencies. We also have a significant library and ongoing and building library of technology and market studies. So we'll make those available to you. And the very sort of nuts and bolts, which if you've been on Zoom and WebEx over the last few months, as I know you all have, meeting facilitation is one of the most critical aspects of this. So as we're in this COVID environment, we will make meeting facilitation available to you, keeping records and all the sort of nuts and bolts and mechanics behind the work here. So before I go to the next slide, I'll just tell you that we are very grateful for the work that everyone has done to provide with us recommendations. Received at least a couple of hundred recommendations of names of individuals that would be helpful to this cause, and we're grateful for all the work that you all put in on this. What we're going to show you now is the 5 panels and then the Just Transition Working Group. Again, what we would propose to do is march through each panel, show you the names that none of you will be surprised to see. They're all very common and well-known names, and many of them came from you as CAC members and from the public at large. We can march through, have a discussion about each panel, and then ultimately, assuming we get through each panel at the end, take a vote on all of the panels. So there's 90 individuals. We can certainly have a discussion about anything that comes to mind during the presentation of these panels, but we may not want to talk about all 90 people at once. We could be here for a very long time today. But please give it a look, and ultimately we'll get these panels working today. All right, let's start with the Transportation Advisory Panel. This is to be chaired by Marie-Therese Dominguez, Commissioner of Transportation. As you know, the work that we have to do with the transportation sector is significant. Transportation is a significant source of emissions, a significant slice of the overall emissions picture. The names we've come up with reflect the best both experience, geographic diversity, representatives from communities of color, gender balance, and certainly substantive expertise. So we would encourage any questions that you all have on this. Can I entertain any questions? So while you're reviewing some of the names, some of the work, we've discussed this in the past, some of the work that this panel will do will be looking at zero emission vehicles, looking at how to reduce emissions from trucks and buses, clean transit, clean fuels, and of course, looking at the disproportionate impacts on disadvantaged communities and communities of color. Unless there are any questions, we'll move to the next panel. So this is agriculture and forestry. These are the people that bring us our food, protect our food sheds, protect our forests, make use of our forest resources. And I think as you'll see here, we have a broad skill set from academia, environmental justice, advocacy, organics, farming, conservation. Richard Ball, a farmer himself and a great commissioner of ag and markets, will be chairing this. I'll let that sit for a moment, and if there are any questions, please raise your hand or chime in. Okay, hearing none, I will continue. The next panel is the Land Use and Local Government panel. So you talk about reducing emissions for the entire economy. You have to demand partnerships at every level, and certainly with local government. That's really important to give them a voice. We've achieved geographic diversity here to reflect the broad swath of New York State, environmental justice, as well as the substantive expertise that we need. This particular panel will look into such things as housing and transit-oriented development, green spaces, capacity building, and of course, very importantly, resilience. Sarah Crowell, who is the director of the Office of Planning and Community Development and Infrastructure at DOS, she will be the chair of this panel and represents the Secretary of State. I'll just let that sit for a second. Any questions?
Basil, we do have a question from Bob. Bob?
Yeah. When I spoke a couple of weeks ago, I had thrown out another name. Is that something that just fell through the cracks, or is there some reason not to consider that? I don't know if this is a time to bring it up or not.
No, it's certainly the time to bring it up. I mean, we have a list here that reflects the recommendations of just about everybody. You know, the panels, the CAC in general, can entertain new names, whether it's today or at a future meeting, in order to fill gaps in expertise.
Okay. Well, let me just again for the group, if that's okay. Is that appropriate?
Sure, and you may want to hold that till the end, because some names we're able to put elsewhere. So if that's still missing at the end, but let's make sure we come back to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, other than coming back to Bob for that question at the end of this this section, any other questions?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, it's Peter Arwanowitz.
Hi, Peter.
I'm just noting on this list, we don't seem to have anybody. It's like a current elected official or somebody serving in local government now.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations you want to bring to the council?
Well, I think we should definitely add. We should think of a couple of different regions represented. You know, cities, towns, with some geographic and gender diversity.
Okay. Okay. That's something we can take up, and you know, the council can appoint additional names after this meeting, and if we want to impanel this particular body today, we can add it for the next meeting. That makes sense. Okay. Any other questions?
Basil, this is Bob again. Just let me. I think it might be an appropriate time to bring up, in light of Peter's comment. The person I suggested is current Tompkins County Legislature, former chair of that legislature, heavily involved in energy issues for many decades and very eager to serve. So I'd like to at least have her considered.
Okay, will do, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? And we'll move on to Doreen is going to handle power gen.
Oh, looks like Donna had a question,
Okay.
Basil. Sorry.
Yeah, just sort of a follow-up question to Bob and Peter's. What is the process then for names that weren't selected yet were recommended? Because I can see everyone probably has a couple of one-off names they wish were included. We do as well. I do as well. People that have come in and sought to serve. So just curious about that. So thank you.
So I would say this: we am I on mute here now? We want to balance keeping a nimble group with having the substantive geographic, gender, and ethnic diversity on every one of these panels. So we weren't able to propose panels that suited everyone's recommendations. We tried to do as well as we could, given the incoming of names. I would say this: if we believe after today, even after we make these groups and panel these various bodies, if we believe we are deficient in any ways, we can take that up over the ensuing weeks and ultimately build out more expertise as needed. I just want to make sure that we have that balance of a nimble and substantive expertise and all the other marks that we're trying to hit. But we are, as a council, are taking this up for the first time and are more than willing to do what we can to strengthen this going on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. And I think, to the point raised by Peter, it would be true that in a panel, really in all of these panels, but of course, notably this particular panel, it is the case that there's going to be consultation with, in this case, elected officials and others by design. That's one of the goals of the panel. And I would say that, when we think about additional panelists, we'd want to do so with that goal in mind as well. Just recognizing that part of the job of these panels is consultation with others. So if we could turn to the next slide, please, we'll carry on to the power generation panel, which will be chaired by the chair of the Public Service Commission, John Rhodes, who is obviously here today, and supported by what we believe to be a very diverse and skilled group of representatives, as you see here, who are looking at power generation from many perspectives. It is important that this panel be skilled in a way that can inform the Public Service Commission to complement the work of the Public Service Commission, as it were, in implementing New York's Clean Energy Standard, which is a hallmark, obviously, of the achievement of the CLCPA. But also to look at the system needs and the transitional needs that we will see as part of our work clearly, including natural gas transmission and distribution, load management, infrastructure siting, and zero emission technologies as well. I personally am very excited to see the diversity of views that will be represented on this panel, to think about these solutions in a way that helps us meet our goals, but also does so in a manner that's reflective of our need for engagement with communities, workforce representatives, and others, including the Just Transition Working Group. So with that, I will pause. Donna, your hand is raised. Is it from the last question, or did you have another?
No, my hand will be withdrawn. Thank you.
No worries at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Doreen, I have a question.
Sure.
Just raised my hand the old-fashioned way.
Okay, sure.
So this looks like a fantastic group of people. Two of the most, controversial and important issues that everyone's talking about now with renewables is renewables in agriculture and community acceptance and support of renewables. So are you thinking that the siting of renewables will be in this panel and not in the agricultural and forestry panel and the land use and local government panel? Just because I noticed there wasn't solar representation in those, for example, but those issues are being tackled here.
Yeah, it's a fair question, Anne, and what I would say just in terms of the scopes that I know are being envisioned would be that this is a cross-cutting issue and one that ultimately all three panels you just identified are going to be looking at the issue from differing perspectives. And so what I would expect would be true is when you meet, as I'll describe in a bit, one of the aspects of your of the panel's first tasks will be the work plan that is intended to be followed. And really, in my view, the intersection of land use and community acceptance and generation siting are those that should be cross-cutting elements of the work plan in a collaborative effort between the panels. I don't know if Commissioner Sigos would have anything to add.
No, I think you're right.
Okay.
Doreen Basil, this is John. Can I jump in for a sec?
Of course.
Without speaking for the entirety of the panel, but since I'm one person on it, it would be my super strong hope that we would actually work with our colleague panels on issues that transcend our sector-specific issues. Hope and commitment. That's all.
So I appreciate both those answers. Thanks. I guess I would just plant the seed that if for example, it's decided that the agriculture and forestry one is going to tackle the issue of solar interacting with ag land, then there should be a representative of the solar industry on that group. And same with land use and local government. If they're going to tackle like local laws for renewable siting or moratoriums.
I think, I mean, Anne, just one thing to think about is whether we think we can achieve the same outcome with the commissioners and the members flagging all of the cross-cutting issues and having a deliberate discussion about how to backfill expertise. It might be that 90% of the recommendations are within the sector, 10% are outside the sector and crossing, multiple panels. Could you structure it in such a way, in effect, to force that discussion and then bring in expertise to consult with that structured discussion? I think that might be easier than adding lots of people to every panel, because I think the further we dig into this, the more we're going to see that there are specific needs that aren't necessarily met on the exact panel, but are elsewhere within the 95 names or so. So it'd be one way to do it. I just throw that out there.
Thank you. Took the words out of my mouth. I think that's something we should be exploring as these panels convene. Thank you, Anne. Moving on to the Energy Efficiency and Housing Panel chaired by Ruth Ann Visnauskas, who is not here today, but is the Commissioner of HCR. Ruth Ann will be supported by the NYSERDA and DPS capable team, of course, but what is, I believe, a really impactful panel with regard to expertise in both issues of housing as well as affordability across all sectors, whether it be residential, commercial, or government. And explicitly, the advisory panel members that were selected here are thinking about the aspects of not only electrification and fuel efficiency, but those who are working directly with building owners who have the very real challenges ahead of them in not only managing buildings, but also the consumers who reside within them. So in our view, this panel has particular expertise in the need of education, as well as the awareness of the on-the-ground issues, including those implementing such important local and regional initiatives, such as Local Law 97, as indicative of this state/local effort that is very integrated. So this panel, as you see here, is as you see here, and if there's any questions, we're happy to talk about them. Okay, next slide, please. The last panel is the Energy Intensive and Trade Exposed Industries panel, chaired by Eric Gertler, the President and CEO of Empire State Development, and supported by the New York Power Authority. This panel will focus attention on energy use, process emissions, and non-combustion sources of greenhouse gases within our industrial sector. And as you can see, there are many representatives within this panel who are those working in this space from the perspective of industry, as well as those who are looking at the question from an economic development perspective and the like, as well as environmental justice issues associated with it. So this is really the question of how can these industries thrive in our future, our low carbon future that we seek to attain. And that we have experts on this panel who look across the sector, in areas such as energy efficiency, fuels, electrification, carbon capture, and the like, all in support of decarbonization. So again, Eric Gertley will be chairing this panel, and we're happy to take any questions you may have. How about Donna? Yeah, let's start with you. Sorry, I had to scroll up there, Donna. Sorry.
Yeah. And I'll lower it now so I don't forget this time. Quick question as to the operation of the panels. I think the statute may have said each of these panels would have 5 voting members. Yeah, they could have more members, but 5 voting members. Is that the case, or maybe I missed that in your earlier slides? Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. The approach to the panels themselves are one that that we have not advanced the exact structure by which the decision making will advance. It is true that there will need to be a means by which consensus is reached among the panel members, and so our thinking is that is going to be a sort of a next step once these panels are advanced. Basil, would you add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, I think part of what we need to achieve here is giving everyone an equal voice within the panels. So I will be honest, as we begin to look at the voting issue, it's hard to pick voters and non-voters. As we read the statute, upon advice of counsel, it is no more. Each panel should have no more than 5 voting members. One could read that to mean that you aren't required to have voting members. Ideally, the panels themselves would reach consensus and then provide for the expression of minority views or dissenting views. To me, that seems a more equitable way for these panels to be governed, since effectively the statute caps voting at 5. So I would throw that out there. Certainly, this can be something that the panels themselves take up. But as far as equity is concerned, I do not want us to be in the position of picking who says what on each panel.
I'd share that view, and also the view that it is important that any minority views be provided as well. Although consensus, we believe is achievable, in almost all cases, it is important that those perspectives be provided. So, good question, Donna. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Dennis?
Thanks, Doreen. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, does this panel here look at what we had learned from the last month's meeting where we said decarbonization, as we proceed with it, we could be seeing 65 to 80% increase in electric demand. If you look at it from the perspective of our cities, that's a dramatic number. And I'm not sure, with energy intensive or trade exposed industry panels, does that fit in terms of, how do you mitigate that 65 to 80% increase? Is this the panel?
Well, I would say that this is certainly the panel, Dennis, that would investigate the impacts of widespread electrification with regard to the particular uses by these representatives and by industry in general. So I think the answer to your question is yes, from the perspective of I'll say responsiveness and an adaptation to the processes, to that reality. Peter, you had a question?
Snyder, just
sorry, Jared.
an additional comment on that. Power generation's role is, ensuring there is sufficient power, electricity to run the economy. And this is an area where, I think there needs to be interaction between the various panels with the power generation panel as they develop their recommendations. For example, transportation, if they're looking at electrification of transportation, they need to engage with the power generation panel. So ultimately, the council can exercise an informed decision as to, what role electrification plays and how to meet the electricity needs of the state.
Yes. We do need to generate in order to consume. That is true. Peter, I think you had a question. One was?
Not a question, as much as a comment. I just wanted to say I'm really happy to see representatives from the environmental justice community here. They fought really pretty hard to make sure that the offset program is fairly constrained in this space, and I think they're going to have valuable input.
I would agree. And I think that has been an area that you will see throughout the panels where the representation is not only important, but significant from these perspectives. And when you have a chance to look at the panels in a little more detail, I think you'll agree that there's some cross-cutting issues that are captured throughout. Gavin, your hand was raised as well.
Yeah, thank you. Doreen, couple observations. On the power generation working group, Jared identified it right. It talks about having sufficient power throughout the system. We talk, and in the statute says power gen sector or working group should involve regulated industries. I'm a little surprised on the power gen working group that there is nobody from the utility sector there. Power generation involves utilities. You can't generate electricity and not have a utility deliver it to customers. So I'm disappointed that there's not a utility rep on that panel, and would ask you folks to take a look at that. And the other side of it is on the energy intensive and trade exposed industries panel, I see you have somebody from National Grid on there, but I think you should probably have somebody from the generation sector on that too, because what you just said, you need to generate electricity to have an economy. So I think it's an oversight that the generators are not on that working group. And then the utilities are not on the power gen sector. But I know this was a difficult process to get through. I appreciate all the hard work, but I think that those are worthwhile suggestions.
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. We'll look back at the power generation panel. As I know, it was a point of discussion as we assembled the panels. And in fact, one that I know we thought about significantly. So I'll have to take a look and see where that landed and see, as discussed with the other inputs, how we can best reflect it. Thank you. Dennis, you had a question?
Sorry, but Gavin, provoked me to think about this again. So again, we're talking about two ends of a three-legged stool where we keep talking about generation or we talk about the end user. But really, it's an issue of balance between supply, demand, and delivery. So we can't just keep on talking about generation or consumer load or consumer use. It's a balancing act between the three. And I know that you probably know that. I just don't hear us talking like that. So I would always encourage an integrated resource solution as opposed to one or the other. I just don't think that works.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dennis. And perhaps I guess as I hear these points made, I think of it in a completely different context, but with the same question that Anne had asked about how does one think about land use issues across multiple panels. I mean, to your point, Dennis, there are cross-cutting issues and decidedly so between the two sides of the meter, so to speak, as you just identified it. No argument from me, certainly. Okay, we have concluded the review of the panels. However, we do need to turn to the next slide, which includes the suggested Just Transition Working Group, which I am personally looking forward to very much from the perspective of co-chairing this working group with the esteemed Commissioner Reardon of the Department of Labor, and supported by the Public Service Commission and HCR as well. And this working group is different from the perspective of goals and objectives than the advisory panels, but is really focused on just that, how to achieve a just transition for the workers of New York, for our communities as a whole, and for the businesses operating here within the state. It is going to be an area that I know I've worked on already with the Commissioner in a significant form, but very much look forward to expanding this work with perspectives, as you can see, from members of environmental justice communities, labor organizations, and members of distinct energy intensive and trade exposed industries as well. So this working group will talk specifically about the deliverables as was described by Basil earlier, which are significant in resource certainly and impact as informing the scoping plan as well. I'll ask Commissioner Reardon if she wanted to say anything as well. Otherwise, we can take any questions.
No, I join you in looking forward to working with this group. It really looks like a great group of people to work with, and I really look forward to working with Doreen and getting this work done.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I just have serious reservations about the co-chair of this working group. I think Roberta is not prone to working hard nor believing in labor.
Where are my bonbons?
But I will set aside my objection and we'll see how it goes.
Well, seeing no hands raised, we will proceed. And so since we've had an opportunity to discuss each of the panels and observe the feedback that you provided very helpfully, I would categorize that feedback, at least in my estimation, as feedback that can be considered and reflected after we advance the panels themselves. However, I will ask before we do so if there are any objections to moving all panels and the working group forward with one vote of the council. So I'll pause there and ask, would anyone object to a single vote in this case? Okay. May I have a motion to approve these advisory panels and working group?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
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 Great. I will now ask Valerie Milanovic to call each member's name in alphabetical order to ask for your vote. When you hear your name called, please signify that you either approve of the panels by saying aye, or you disapprove of the panels by saying no. Valerie?
Thank you, Doreen. When I call your name, please acknowledge your vote on the resolution before you. Co-Chair Harris?
Aye.
Co-Chair Sagos?
Aye.
Commissioner Ball?
Aye.
Donna D. Carolis?
Aye.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Aye.
Gavin Donahue?
Aye.
Dennis Elsenbeck?
Aye.
CEO Falcone? Kevin Hansen?
Aye.
Rose Harvey?
Aye.
Bob Howard?
Aye.
Peter Iwanowitz?
Aye.
President Milachos?
Aye.
CEO Quinones?
Aye.
Commissioner Reardon?
Aye.
Ann Reynolds?
Aye.
Chair Rhodes?
Aye.
Keisha Santiago?
Aye.
Raya Salter?
Aye.
Paul Shepson?
Aye.
Rebecca Kepnick?
Aye.
And Henry Splitoff.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it and the resolution is approved.
Thank you, Val, and thank you, everyone. And congratulations to all of the members of the panels and the working groups. We certainly look forward, I know, as a council, and working with the members as well as those appointed today to the working groups and the advisory panels. So if we were in the same room, I'd clap, but we'll have to virtually cheer of some sort on this important milestone. So moving to the next slide, now that we've celebrated, let's talk about the work. With this important business completed, we do want to advise all panelists as to the next steps that they can expect. First of all, as Basil noted, we would like each panel to meet soon and would suggest they do so no later than the middle of next month. In order to advance the work, a first order of business should be to advance the work plans of the panels, which will guide their process, schedule, and deliberations. So through the advisory panel chairs, each panel will receive a work plan template and will work to complete the template through a streamlined process and coordinated advancement that is taking place as just discussed within the groups and across the groups as well. It will also help the advisory panels to advance their work in a manner that's consistent and more easily utilized by those of us as members of the council for our ultimate review and feedback, which is important to note that we will be reviewing their work products and advancing their recommendations as well. So in terms of next steps, as advisory panel members, you should be hearing from the panel chairs very soon to set up the first meeting and to begin your work. So please be on the lookout in that regard. Next slide, please. When we think about the timeline, we do not have long. We do not have time to wait from the perspective of hitting the ultimate schedule for the advancement of the draft scoping plan and beyond. And so you can see through this timeline, we are looking to set up a rhythm of meetings of the Climate Action Council itself. This particular schedule is indicative of the types of meetings that we would anticipate having at important milestones along the way. And we will be looking to formalize this schedule very soon. But you can see that the council meetings are importantly coordinated with the work of the advisory panels as the panels first meet, develop their work plans, and then advance the particular recommendations, analysis, or other activities to inform the council. Included within this is the opportunity for the panels to provide us as council members with updates on their progress and provide briefings also on the topics of interest from the panel work as well. And as discussed, there may also be need and certainly an expectation for public meetings or outreach from the advisory panels to other stakeholders. And so the public participation is important to ensure that the work products of the panels are advanced in a manner that is comprehensive and reflective of the inclusive nature of our effort together. So we will see that concurrent with that outreach, the panels will be conducting their work. And we want to make sure that the advisory panel's primary work is to identify recommendations for our consideration through the spring of next year. And then we as a council will work to integrate the input from the advisory panels and consider their input as part of our statewide strategy that we as a council will then be advancing. And so we call this an integration analysis. It's seeking to integrate the input of the panels and the working groups so as to inform the draft scoping plan on the schedule you see here. And so as we see, today's meeting is a critical milestone for us as we begin our work together to hit the milestones as you see them here today. If we turn to the next slide, please, I'd like to turn the presentation as we pivot from the important milestones of today's advisory panels and working group to the discussion topics that I had identified in the original agenda. So Basil?
Excellent. Thank you. And let me also say congratulations to all the new panel members out there in the ether. We're so glad to have you aboard. It's going to be fun and hard work. And maybe you won't like us at the very end because we're going to be pushing you hard. But we like you. So that's all that matters. But thank you. I'll just talk quickly about waste management. This came up as an issue during at least the last CAC meeting. Next slide, please. As you know, waste management was not called out as a particular sector within the CLCPA for a panel. Nonetheless, it's a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions, about 8% statewide. Primarily, that's methane. So we have to do something about it. Certainly, when the scoping plan is assembled, we would want to be able to address such things as waste reduction policies, recycling, food donation, waste-based fuels, organics recycling, and getting really on top of the landfill issue that has plagued the country and New York for many years in terms of emissions. Next slide, please. So what we are proposing here is, rather than creating a new panel, is creating a core team within DEC, within our two divisions, air resources and materials management, to effectively advise the CAC on this. We would run this much like we would propose to run the panels themselves in terms of coordination with key stakeholders, soliciting public input, having public engagement and transparency, again, same as with the panels, and then report back to us on a regular basis and take direction from us to investigate certain things. So the advantage of that, obviously, is the ease of management. We're not creating then a seventh body to oversee. From a large stakeholder perspective, we can run it nimbly within the DEC and coordinate closely with CAC and all the other panels. We can begin work on that also immediately and not wait until we're able to identify names and go through the process of selecting those individuals. So it's my proposal to put that out there for you all and get your support for it. And obviously, to get to that point, Entertain any questions.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
So it seems like a sensible idea because there's this whole planning infrastructure within DEC, and I was wondering what the scoop was with the state solid waste management plan, because this is the same process that I think is required for that, and that might be underway for all I know. I just know the last one was done 10-ish years ago, and I think it would be so to me, like, it'd be sensible to have them be the same thing, and have the state solid waste management plan be about reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the waste sector.
So I think what I would propose is the two of them are interrelated and have the same outcomes, but not necessarily the same timing. The state solid waste management plan, the timing of that, yes, we are working on that, and ultimately that will inform what we're doing now. But I don't want the rollout of a larger solid waste management plan necessarily to slow down the work product that could come back into the council for the generation of recommendations. But I think you're absolutely right. We absolutely need to incorporate climate change into solid waste management plan. Now the team is already thinking about that. We already have air and waste lined up to do that. And I think if we try to merge them together too much, we're going to end up slowing down the process. But Anne, you'll certainly have a chance to weigh in on both those documents.
I have a question. I can't see where my hand gets raised, but anyway, do I have the floor?
Yes.
Thank you. So I assume that the intent here is similar to the advisory panel groups in that each of the advisory panels represents a sector, more or less. And so this, if that's correct, that this working group would be representing this sector, this component of methane emissions, I'm a little bit concerned about the possibility of disproportionate focus on this particular component of methane emissions unless we construct a similar working group for other important components, in particular the natural gas infrastructure, transportation, and end-use components of natural gas infrastructure. So I guess I'll ask the commissioner, is that a reasonable concern that if we only have a working group for this component of methane emissions, that we might end up with input to the CAC that is disproportionately focused on waste management?
Well, let me just start. I'm going to have Jared answer some of that. We shouldn't feel constrained as a CAC by the panels or groups that are out there. Again, we can go and seek expertise on a range of issues that we don't believe are necessarily covered by the existing panels or the working group or even the climate justice working group on the outside, as well as the environmental justice advisory group, which will be impaneled. So that shouldn't serve as a barrier to us getting the kind of expertise that we believe is necessary to inform ultimately the scoping plan. Jared, did you want to weigh in specifically to Paul's point?
Yeah, just a couple of points. We see that other advisory panels will cover the methane emissions from other source categories. For example, power generation should consider the use of natural gas in power generation and how to reduce the methane emissions associated with that. Perhaps similarly for the energy efficiency in housing working group. And then agriculture is obviously another source of methane emissions, and that would be covered by the agriculture and forestry panel.
Yeah, one could also argue that the land use advisory panel would or could have membership that incorporated or represented the waste management issue. So I'm just wondering if it feels to anyone else a little bit, maybe arbitrary is not quite the right word, but we have decided to place an emphasis on this one sector. I appreciate Jared's response. I understand it.
Any other thoughts?
I've raised my hand. I guess I can go ahead and fire away. I guess I'm concerned that this particular working group, does not reflect, stakeholder representation outside of government like the other groups. In particular, waste management. We've got a robust environmental justice throughout the panels. We've got an environmental justice group that's running on another track. So I'm concerned about it because it seems like a key area for that direct stakeholder representation. And I'm also interested in the rationale for why this has been designed to be sort of a government advisory in this particular area.
Mm-hmm. Great question. So we would certainly entertain ways in which we could structure this to ensure for public input, meaningful public input. You might have to turn your volume down. So that's an open question for the group. Any reactions to that? Ways in which we could do this without having to create a new panel?
So, not to be too repetitive, but that was one of the, Ray's question was one of the reasons I asked mine. I know in the solid waste management planning process, it's already laid out that you have stakeholder input from different stakeholders at different times. I'm not sure if that's by law or by practice, but I figured if it was happening through that you'd be guaranteed to have that stakeholder input, because I share her concerns. There should, it should be formalized that there is some, for sure.
Commissioner, it's Gavin.
Gavin.
First of all, I appreciate you guys looking at this, and a number of us have suggested this effort. But my hand's been up for a while. Ray raised a good question. You've got working groups, the stakeholders in the environmental justice area, and all the other working groups. A lot of people need to have a seat at the table, I think, here, and not having industry on this I think is a big mistake or oversight. Not to beat a dead horse here, but I just wanted to get that on the record.
Sure, got it. And I think just one reaction to what all of you are saying is, I mean, this would be a body created under my direction here at DEC. So we could literally do whatever we want with it and structure it in such a way as to ensure there is local representation from disadvantaged communities, utilities, any of the generators, any of the landfills, industry. I mean, short of making it a panel, we could effectively achieve the same outcome. Given that it is not yet proposed as a panel, I would just be interested if people are willing to help craft something that fulfills the same outcomes. And we'll entertain any other questions or thoughts on that.
Hey, Basil, following up on that, maybe we can ask this working group to produce for the next meeting a plan for how they will engage with stakeholders and obtain that broad base of input into their deliberations.
I mean, certainly, happy to engage on process and substance. Also just interested in, the purpose, mission, and, purpose and mission, of this working group.
Okay. So following on what Jared said, why don't I have the proposed group, as Jared said, come up with a proposal a more fleshed out proposal as to how they would govern themselves, conduct outreach, do it in a structured way, that fulfills the concerns that you all have raised. If at the next CAC meeting, we don't believe that achieves what we need it to as a CAC, then we can discuss alternatives. In the meantime, I would suggest that you think about the individuals that you think that we would want to begin talking to immediately, because ultimately, again, going back to the benefit of this, we can start this now. Even if we start this now, I'd like the team to start doing that outreach now. So if you would, please come back at the next meeting with some ideas for us. Does that make sense?
I think that's a good, this is Rose. I think that's a good proposal.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. All right. We'll flesh it out. We'll bring it back to you all, and if it works, then we'll move ahead with it.
Basil, I think we have a question from Commissioner Ball as well. The others, I think, have been asked.
Well, I think you proposed a pretty good solution there, Basil. Thank you. But as a chair of a committee, I would certainly like to see this topic brought up in the scope of our committee meetings, and making an agenda item at a specific meeting or several meetings. That might be an alternative way to handle it as well.
Okay, good idea, Richard. So whether it's the next meeting or the meeting after, we'll have a formal presentation, assuming that we agree this is the way to have this sector function. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing more on that, I will turn it over to Jared, right?
Yes. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So as the co-chairs indicate in their opening comments, New York is actively pursuing the goals of the CLCPA. And at this point, we'd like to provide updates on a few other actions underway. First, I'd like to turn it over to Brendan Woodruff, who is an environmental protection specialist, leading New York's work on the recently constituted Green New York Council. Brendan is going to give a short briefing on the Greening New York State report, which was released yesterday. And that report highlights examples of the state's leadership in reducing its own emissions, consistent with Section 7.1 of the CLCPA. So, Brendan, turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jared. Next slide. So Governor Cuomo recently announced the formation of the Green New York Council. This is a multi-agency working group that is co-chaired by DEC, OGS, NYSERDA, and NYPA. It is tasked with implementing the state's lead by example directives, and it will also serve as a key resource to support the state's strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with Section 7.1 of the CLCPA. And this, of course, is the section of the law that directs all state agencies to reduce their operational emissions in line with the emission limits that were set in the law itself. And this builds upon a lot of the lead by example work that we've been doing over the years. Council members have been working together for over a year to leverage resources, create guidance, and to harmonize the reporting, all in an effort to make it easier for agencies to meet these ambitious goals that we have when it comes to sustainability and climate. Just as an example of the work that the council has been doing, they recently held a climate science training for operations and other frontline staff to help them see how their jobs and responsibilities can lead to further emissions reductions. So next slide. So with this, the council is proud to have just released this year's Green New York report, which outlines the progress that is being made towards the state's sustainability and climate goals. We've got a couple highlights here for you today. The state facilities have decreased their energy use 14.4% since 2010. We're projecting a 22% decrease by the end of 2020, which will exceed the Build Smart goal of 20%. In 2019 alone, energy efficiency measures reduced greenhouse gas emissions more than 290,000 tons. In addition, state facilities generated 10 million kilowatt hours of solar power. This was triple the amount that was generated in 2016. The state green purchasing program has invested $124 million in green products. This is an increase of $7 million over the previous year, and we're really proud of this statistic because this is helping drive the market in a greener direction and help businesses scale up these products as they're more affordable for others as well. In addition, we found that state employees commute using transit at 4 times the national average, and twice as many agencies are composting organic material than they were in 2012. So with this report, we've got a good baseline. With the formation of the council, we've got a great multi-agency working group, and we're really excited on what we're going to do next. Thank you. Back to you, Jared.
All right, thank you, Brendan. So does anybody have questions for Brendan on that exciting development? I see many hands raised, but I think they're all the hands raised from the prior discussion.
Hey, Jared, I don't have a question, but I was just going to say kudos on it. It's really great to see. It's really hard to do. It's important work, and I would just highlight the opportunity because the state of New York's government operations are probably bigger than some. I don't know if they're bigger than some states. Entire states, I'm not sure, but electrifying transportation comes to mind as an area where there could be so much learning within state government because there's so many different types of vehicles, right? There's ports, there's medium, heavy duty, there's law enforcement, and changing over those different uses to electric vehicles would just set a great example for the state as a whole. So congrats on this work, but and good luck with the rest of it. More to come.
All right, thank you, Ann.
Yeah,
You know, I see a couple of hands that might be new hands. Bob?
Yeah, if I could just make a brief comment. I appreciate this summary. It's great to see these wonderful things happening. I would like, however, to caution and remind the entire council that the CLCPA mandates a new approach to looking at greenhouse gas emissions, and we should be careful when we put out numbers for public consideration until the approach is endorsed. So the 290,000 tons will surely not be true under the new accounting system. But just a cautionary note there. But a great summary otherwise. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. Dennis, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thanks, Jared. Yeah, so we talk a lot about green energy jobs, and then one of the highlights that was listed as $124 million purchasing green energy projects or products, excuse me. Do we track what of those green products come from New York?
Brendan, can you take that on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this, the $124 million that we quote here is what the state is purchasing through what we have created through our green purchasing specification through the Executive Order 4 process. We don't at the moment track how much of those are coming from New York.
So I guess the next question, shouldn't we?
That's something we can certainly look into.
Yeah, my point is that a number of these initiatives are funded by either taxpayers or ratepayers in New York, and I think we've got to start thinking about that instead of just treating individuals as if they're cost centers, but how do we get them to look at it from an investment point of view and really creating these type of green energy jobs that are sustainable, and they're more sustainable if we're giving credit to individuals that are producing them in New York. Just thank you, though.
And Dennis, it's Jared. I would just say that there's a couple of opportunities to, for the council to inform that. that kind of thinking. For example, the Just Transition working group, may have recommendations as to, how policies that can create additional employment opportunities in New York, and policies that encourage, consumption of New York products can play a role in that. And, similarly, I think, the energy intensive trade exposed industries group can think about, those opportunities for, producing low carbon products in New York that would find a market in New York, but elsewhere.
I agree. Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, this is Doreen. If I could just respond as well, Dennis. I think it's a good point. I would have to investigate how this works from the perspective of this particular report, but I would say in general, it is an objective that we have in using New York companies in sort of constructing, the renewable projects or other projects that we have across the state. So we already put that into motion from our buying from the private market, but it's a good point in this regard as well. I'll have to learn more.
I also had a question here. I know I'd raised my hand. I guess I'll jump in. I'm thrilled to see this type of interagency, collaboration to understand and implement the CLCPA. Would love to see these type of efforts magnified, and there are additional pieces that all of the agencies are going to need to grapple with. In particular, I'm thinking of making decisions that don't have this phrase. One of my favorite phrases: create disproportionate burdens to disadvantaged communities, prioritizing emissions reductions in disadvantaged communities, and of course, teeing up to understand the investment mandate or the goal of 40% investment, and that agencies will have to also grapple with these. Is, what kind of infrastructure can we make sure is built so that agencies can understand their full scope of responsibility with regards to the CLCPA? I guess I would encourage that we do build that infrastructure, but it's also a question in terms of for folks.
Yeah. And thank you, Raya. And that question goes beyond, the work that Brendan discussed of the Green New York Council, certainly. And we are conscious of the emphasis in the CLCPA on considering the needs of disadvantaged communities. There's another section of the CLCPA, section 7.3, that really points directly to that obligation. And we and other agencies are conscious of it, and considering those impacts in our decision-making processes. I think it's an opportunity also for the Climate Justice Working Group, to weigh in with their recommendations, and the council, if the council wants to make recommendations for state actions as part of the recommendations it produces in the scoping plan.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I just want to say that it's really important with particular regard to the investment mandate or 40% goal for investment, because the agencies grapple with how that money is being spent now and in what category, in order for the Climate Justice Working Group to be able to understand and grapple what this sort of reinvestment frame will look like. But thank you very much for that answer. I agree, absolutely.
It's a great point, Ryan. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know the norms here, but I had a question. It's Peter.
Okay, Peter.
So first, I just want to lift up what Raya just said. I think it's really important, and I think we should definitely reflect on it. I also want to bring back a concept that Gavin Donahue and I brought to the table at the first meeting. It's a fuller appreciation of, how all state agencies are going to comply with Section 7 overall. So it's nice to have that at the council for 7.1, but, we really like a discussion about what's going on in the state, all agencies, divisions, authorities, everything that's covered by Section 7.2, 7.3.
Thank you, Peter. We recognize that you made that request previously. The Section 7, the various elements of Section 7 are, just to be clear, are obligations of each agency. They're not obligations of DEC to enforce, for example. They're not obligations of the Climate Action Council. That said, all the agencies are conscious of that obligation, and we're providing input, advice from DEC, where appropriate to other agencies. Why don't we take up, this request under advisement, and can evaluate whether that makes sense to provide a fuller briefing at a future meeting. And thank you for bringing it up again.
Yeah, I think we've seen in a high-profile case, the agency did a tremendous job applying this 7.2 to the Williams pipeline. I think it's good to sort of see how well other agencies are appreciating that this is law of the land, including, the Division of Budget, and all the other entities in New York State. So.
Yeah, any other comments, questions? All right, we'll move on to the next slide then. Basil, yeah, if you could turn off yours. So we just wanted to provide a briefing on the Part 496.
We are socially distant, but we're having technical issues.
Part 496, the statewide greenhouse gas emission limits. The CLCPA requires DEC to establish the 2030 and 2050 emission limits by the end of this year, and basically, to translate those 40% and 85% reduction goals into numerical emission limits. So, and it also provides some specific direction in how we do that. For example, for the first time, the statute requires us to consider upstream emissions from fossil fuels in establishing those emission limits, and also to consider a 20-year global warming potential for methane. Well, so we've developed those emission limits in a rulemaking proposal. That is Part 496. The proposal is open for public comment until October 27th, and virtual public hearings are scheduled for October 20th. And you can see on this slide details on where you can access that rulemaking. One highlight of it is the new methodology required by the CLCPA has the effect of significantly increasing our estimate in 1990 emissions. And so it increases, the starting point for calculating those 40% and 85% emission reductions. That 1990 baseline we've calculated is now approximately 401 million tons, as opposed to our prior calculation of 236 million tons. And And so that, that's a fairly significant change that results from the inclusion of upstream emissions and that 20-year global warming potential for methane. It just shows that addressing those emissions become more and more important in meeting the emission goals. You see on the slide, the emission limits are 240.83 million metric tons, and the 2050 limit is 60.21 million metric tons. And again, that's a proposal. We look forward to public comments on that proposal. Just want to highlight a couple of considerations in developing those proposed limits. Based on our reading of the statute, those emission limits are gross emissions, not net emissions. And that's because there's an additional goal in the statute of achieving net zero in 2050. And so in coming up with that 85% reduction by 2050 and the 2030 limits, we interpreted that the statute was focusing on gross emissions. The net emissions go to that net zero goal, which would include sequestration, uptake in plants, things like that. So those are separate from this emission limit. Second issue is the methane quantification. There were a number of comments about whether to use a top-down or bottom-up approach for methane calculation. A bottom-up is basically looking at estimates of emissions from various types of source categories using an EPA methodology and adding those up to come up with the estimate of methane emissions. Top-down is a fairly recent technology that is based on using flyovers and technology to detect methane from the air, and generally that is showing higher levels of methane emissions often than the bottom-up approach. The problem is we don't have that top-down information for 1990, and these emission reduction limits are based on 1990 emissions. So what you'll see in the rulemaking is this is based, the limits are based on that bottom-up approach, but that doesn't mean we need to use that approach as we continue our work on inventories. As we get better information from a top-down approach, that can be used in developing the current inventory and inventory showing our progress going forward. So that process on developing the inventories is beginning. We're also going to engage in a stakeholder process to inform the development of those inventories. So that's really a summary, I think, of the rulemaking. More details are in the documents. You can see at the link online. And I guess I invite any questions or comments at this time.
Yeah, I have a question.
I see a number of hands raised. Again, I don't know whether they're new or not. Bob, I see you on the screen, so why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you, Jared, and thank you for the presentation. I have a procedural question and then a comment. My reading of the CLCPA says that the DEC and NYSERDA, in consultation with the Climate Action Council, will develop these guidelines. I appreciate that, I as an individual have been able to talk to you and staff, and I will certainly give written comment in the hearings, but so far I haven't seen any real role for the Climate Action Council here other than the fact that we are getting these briefings. And I know Paul Shepson, I won't put words in his mouth, but he's previously pointed out that he's concerned about the inclusion of the latest and best on methane accounting in order to get that in there. So that's sort of a procedural question. A comment is, as the members of the council know, I've actually just published a peer-reviewed paper this week on this very topic I think your team has done a better job than I did in some parts, but I think I did a better job in some other parts. And I think there ought to be a way to sort of talk that through. Specifically, I very strongly believe that we should use the top-down approach when we can. And I would point out that Miller et al. Published in 2013 that provides a strong top-down approach for the 1990 baseline. And so I think that ought to be included. But my basic point at the moment for the council to consider is, what is the role for the council here? What does it mean for these numbers to be developed in consultation with the council? Thank you.
So, Bob, we've been conscious of that direction in the statute, and that's why we've had these briefings of the council and inviting input. And, you know, as you pointed out, you and Paul Shepson took us up on that and provided input. And, you know, so we had a previous briefing. We invited the council to participate in a webinar, and then this briefing today provides another opportunity for input. You know, one thing I want to emphasize is that our rulemaking decision, however, has to be based on the rulemaking record. So, you know, the consultation today is certainly informative, and but I would encourage you and you know, anybody else on the council or people that are listening in online to you know, provide their comments in that public comment process.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? I see other hands raised again. I don't know whether they're new or not. Anne?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you would talk through that first bullet under key considerations again, because I didn't understand. I'm probably the only one, but if you could.
Okay. So for some uses, some emissions, if you used a net approach, you would subtract, say, you know, one example is biomass consumption. So when you're consuming biomass, it produces emissions, and it may also result in additional uptake of CO2 if the trees that you know are being consumed are regrowing. That gives you net emissions then by subtracting that sequestration from the emissions themselves. That gets you from gross emissions to net emissions. What our reading of the statute is, that net part is separate. That's the 15% difference between 85% reduction and 100% reduction. And so that this emission limit needs to be based just on gross emissions. We recognize, however, that in achieving the goals of the statute, you know, there is a role for considering those sequestration benefits. And it's similar for, you know, some biofuels, you know, renewable natural gas, for example. And so, you know, we're going to be engaging in a stakeholder process to consider those types of benefits, the net emissions, in that ongoing inventory process to ensure that we are making progress both in reducing gross emissions but also reducing net emissions. Does that help?
I think so, yeah. So, but for the purposes of the regulatory limits that you're going to establish, it's just the 1990 using the new baseline for under the CLCPA guidelines reduced by the designated percentage.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that time.
Sure. I've been told I was on mute. So Commissioner Ball, did you have a question? Or Gavin Donahue, Paul Shepson? Those are some hands I see.
I did not, hands down. Thank you, though.
Yeah, mine is
I don't have a question either. I don't know. I thought I put it down. I'm sorry.
Paul, did you have a comment?
Yeah, it's sort of a follow-up to Bob's comments that, you know, about our input with respect to the emissions limits. You have heard my comments before that our understanding of the actual emissions, particularly for methane, is a rapidly developing field in the scientific community. And my concern is that, you know, are we effectively carving in stone the emission limits in the end of October, and the opportunity for input is pretty much over at that point in terms of our approach on the emission limits. Again, my concern is how we respond when at some point in the future, the scientific community's understanding of what the actual emissions were in 1990 change dramatically, and they're likely to at some point, some unknown point in the future. But where we are with the emission limits, the rulemaking is over this fall, right? And so the opportunity for input is, well, it's relatively urgent. Eric, correct?
So Paul, the limits we establish now are not necessarily written in stone forever. If there are further developments that cause us to question the accuracy of those emission limits, there is nothing to prevent us from undertaking another rulemaking to amend those emission limits. What we're producing today, or with this rulemaking, is what we believe to be, you know, the emission limits based on the best available science at this time. But we recognize the science is rapidly developing in this area.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging. Thank you, Jared.
Paul. I think that's all. So Basil, I think turn it over to you for the final slide.
Great. Thanks, Jared. And Doreen, feel free to weigh in here as well. So next steps, just housekeeping wise, as we did last time, we're going to reach out to you as soon as possible to schedule the next meeting. Begin thinking about times in which you would be free next month. Next month is obviously a very busy month on the climate side, Climate Week, New York City. So ideally, working around that would be important. Give us time to actually do some work. So we'll be in touch. Today was great. One of the biggest things we needed to do this summer was to impanel all of those expert panels, and we did that. So knowing that there's still some questions lingering on that, we'll take that up over the coming weeks. But really, congratulations to all of you again, and to all of the new panelists for their willingness to serve. I mean, really, it is going to be an enormous amount of work, but it is a great cross section of New York State, and something that you know, we should all be proud of. So we will, if you're out there in the ether, we will be giving you all the support you need to get off the ground and start running on this as soon as possible. Great. So without any further ado, we can either proceed to closing, or Doreen, if you have any further comments or questions.
Only to say, again, to second my congratulations to everyone and to thank the council for not only welcoming me, but also with regard to the very significant progress we're making as a state. It's really exciting to be a part of it, and I hope you all agree. So that's all from me. Thank you, Basil, and thank you, everyone.
Anything else, Timothy?
I got
I think Gavin might have a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
So I was just looking for a little bit of clarification on three things. We talked a little bit about in some of these subpanels, the working groups, how to add additional names and voices. Will there be a process sort of set up by you and Doreen to, effectuate that, Basil? Second thing is, I thought I heard you said at the beginning when you were announcing the panels that they were going to be public. There'll be obviously public forums at least once, but then you talked about open and public meetings and transparency. Can we have a little bit further clarification on that before we leave today? And then related to that, but thirdly, is a number of us have expressed an interest in all three of our meetings now of council members participating or at least attending and maybe, for lack of a better term, auditing some of these work groups, and what process will be set up so that we can do that.
Okay. On the last one, I don't have an answer for you. Let us take that back and mull it over. On the process for new names, we'll think about that as well. There were a couple names that were lingering out there. One on the elected official front, and then some other substantive additions that folks wanted to make. So let us mull that over. I think generally when it comes to adding elected officials, I think we need to be cautious of the slippery slope in that, adding elected officials on one panel might open up the floodgates and expectations for adding them elsewhere. And if we can achieve a balance on interest and involvement with the elected officials through our regular stakeholder process, then we should consider that as well. But points are well made today. Where we might have gaps, and we'll circle back with you as we did last time on how we might be able to fill them. So that's one. On the public transparency in meetings, absolutely. I'm going to encourage the panels to do all they can to make their meetings public, knowing that some of the work that they're going to have to do is going to be between meetings. So I don't want to hamstring them and say that they have to have every single meeting in the public. As I'd mentioned, just a brief comment about, their prep for various meetings, their preparations for meetings with us, their conduct during the intervening weeks in putting together, expert findings or draft recommendations. I'm going to leave it to them to decide, which of those meetings or sub meetings need to be public, but our expectation is that we're going to have this be as open and transparent as possible. At a bare minimum, every single thing that they generate in terms of meeting minutes will be made public as soon as possible after each meeting.
Great, I applaud you on that. And just a subset of adding more people to the existing panels, and we've thrown out there the concept in the first meeting, and I thought you agreed it was a good idea of communications panel. We should really be thinking about it. I'll have to look back at the slides again, but I'm not sure that we have any presentation from Indigenous communities, and I would really encourage us to branch out into that category and almost set up in a separate, either a working group like you're envisioning with the agency, or a panel that would bring into the issues of Indigenous populations.
So it's a good question. I'm glad you raised that. In fact, and we Elizabeth Jacobs from the Akwesasne, she's acting executive director of the Akwesasne Housing Authority, has agreed to join us on the energy efficiency and housing panel. Rosa Mendez and David Witt in our office here, environmental justice and Indian affairs representatives, have been in consultation with several of the native tribes, and what they had expressed in the beginning was a desire to participate, but through a more formal consultation process. that they are typically accustomed to. It's really important for us to hear those voices from the Haudenosaunee, Shinnecock, and others. And certainly that'll be something that we, as a CRC, will embark separate from the panel's process.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
I also.
Okay, Basil, on things, I have two things. So I'll try to whittle the list down. I was wondering if it's possible for us to try to put a 6-month meeting calendar together so that we could sort of plan these meetings so it's not so helter-skelter as to when they're going to occur. It's tough to schedule for all of us. I understand it's a challenge. I would just ask that that be talked about. We have monthly meetings for a lot of different councils across the state. It'd be nice if we had an established schedule, but that's more of a process issue. Along the lines of Section 7 of the law, we talk about the law impacting all the economies of the state. We've just had a major hurricane, reliability problems. Downstate, we've got California having their own reliability problems. I have asked, and I do appreciate Doreen getting back to me, for the ISO to come in and make a presentation about how the lights stay on, how the system works. This council would benefit from a presentation from the ISO. I think some people unofficially thought that was a worthwhile thing to do. I am requesting that that be something that's on the next council agenda if possible.
Great. Gavin, unless there are objections from Doreen scheduling wise, that seems to make sense to me. So it's the next meeting or the meeting after that. And on the 6-month schedule, it's certainly, sorry?
I didn't say anything.
Okay, so something we certainly aspire to. I think, Doreen, if you, I don't know if you could pull that slide back up on the panels, which has notes on our meetings as well as the panel meetings. Can you go back to that?
Yep.
So, right. So filling that out, those are certainly where we believe we would need to meet. So the next 6 months, really carrying through February, at least 4 more meetings, if I read that right, for us, while the advisory panels are conducting the bulk of their work. If amenable, what we'll do is shoot around a draft schedule for everyone's planning purposes of when we'd like to have those meetings. For example, late September gives us a chance to hear from the advisory panels on their work plans. Early to mid-November gets us before Thanksgiving. And then, of course, before the holidays in December, if we can meet as well before that week-long dry spell. That to me is the most important. That we get through January, state of the state budget period, and into February. If you could begin planning on that type of rhythm over the coming months, and we will try to get you some date ranges that will not work, that we know will not work for us. For example, Climate Week, we'd want to go after that, and so on, just for planning purposes. And then I'll leave it to you all to give us dates that are absolutely no go for you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, Gavin, I would just, if I could just jump in. Yeah, completely agree with the schedule. And believe me, the feeling is mutual. We would like very much, now that we have the panels ready to go, to establish some rigor around the deliverables and as well as the meetings themselves. So we're with you on that one. And then with regard to the presentation from the NISO, I think it will be important. And in fact, I just spoke with Rich Dewey this week. I'd like the presentation to also describe to some extent what was observed in California and the lessons that have been learned as to the genesis and areas where we in New York can learn from that experience. So I think it would be an important agenda item, and I just need to check with him as to when that would be ready to be discussed. But support both fully. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you, Dawn.
Right.
I had a question with regards to an executive director. Will this body be able to weigh in on that position, the scope, the duties, the nature of that person, and also others who may come on board to support the various elements of what is shaping up to be a fantastic public process.
That's a great question, Raya. First of all, I will note that on NYSERDA's website now is a posting for an executive director as well as an advisor to work directly on this effort as part of the Climate Action Council. So if you haven't seen it, please do take a look. I'd be very interested in your views as to the scope. We certainly worked hard to make sure we thought it served all of our needs. And I think you bring up a good point, and one for which I don't have an answer, but I will commit to provide one, is perhaps when we get down to a short list or other means to integrate members in the sort of the final interview process, I actually think it's a good idea. So let me think about that one, Raya. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And if you want great suggestions or good places to post this job, NY News has a wonderful sort of list of where you can ensure a diverse applicant pool as they go through searches that led us to people like Raya joining NY News and such. So just reach out. We can provide you sort of where we post our jobs to get great talent in the amazing coalition of NY News.
Great. Thanks, Peter. I'll pass that along.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns, happiness, applause? All right. Great job today, everybody. Thanks for your time. We'll see you in a month.
Thank you.